Top leadership at some of the country's Big Ten universities are under fire for keeping communications about the COVID crisis private and on a confidential line. Emails obtained by the Washington Post reveal that they colluded to keep talks about returning to school and the football season private and away from public scrutiny by using what's called the Big Ten portal. Washington Post sports reporter Emily Giambalvo is one of the writers behind the piece and is joining us now. All right, Emily, so break this down for us. What happened with the Big Ten? Because I think some people are going to say, so what? They wanted to have private conversations about their planned reopening in the football season. What's the big deal there? What were they doing?
Yeah, I think the big takeaway is that these university presidents and leaders were making some of the biggest decisions ever with whether students should return to school, whether sports should resume with the pandemic going on. And what we saw was that they actively wanted to keep their communications private. And they did that because they have this portal that's run through the conference office in the Big Ten. And by doing that, those documents and those communications were not released via open records. And we saw emails where a university chancellor said, hey, let's move this conversation over to the portal because we don't want things to come out through open records. And obviously, these public officials are required to comply with laws that ensure transparency. And it just seems like that was missing while making these really important decisions. And that's what some people are startled by, that this would actively happen. And I think it's really interesting, and people deserve to know that that's what was going on.
So open records requests to several schools for the documents and communications housed on that platform were denied. What's the significance of these schools' attempt to keep this information confidential, and what could they be hiding? And I guess, are they breaking any public record laws?
Yeah, it's really interesting. In talking to experts about this, it's such a foggy topic because we know that emails should be public, but we also know that the conference is a private entity. So we're kind of in a blurry area where we don't really know, how this would be interpreted by the law. But I think your first point is what's really interesting is that because it's not being released, we don't know what's on there. It could be nothing bad at all. It could be exactly what the public, would want to hear in this situation. But the most important thing is that we just don't know. And I think that's a story in itself, is that these decisions for public universities that are funded by taxpayers, in the law, the public has the right to know those deliberations and how those communications were handled among these top officials.
Yeah, because what we do know is that these big sports teams make an awful lot of money for the universities. The football season for several Big Ten universities really messed up because of COVID. The NCAA tournament is starting, but they had to cancel last year's tournament. I'm sure that cost the universities a lot of money. Can you walk us through the dilemma universities face when they're making a decision to move forward with sporting events?
Yeah, and that was the conversation that every official was having this summer, because on one hand, these big money sports like football and men's basketball were bringing in millions and millions of dollars to these athletic departments and essentially funding the whole operation. And when you can't have a season or you can't have the NCAA tournament last year, it really hurt a lot of these schools. So they're making the decision about whether to have sports, knowing that that's what's at stake, but also wanting to, or hoping that they would be protecting the health and safety of their athletes. So I think when you have an official making that call, you'd really just want transparency on that matter and make sure, they did feel confident in keeping these athletes safe, and they're amateurs and 18 to 22-year-olds. And while knowing that so much money is on the line here, I think that certainly just changes the dynamic of the decision, and you'd want to have full transparency there.
University of Wisconsin-Madison Chancellor Rebecca Blank has recently apologized for keeping COVID-19 discussions private. She says her intent was, quote, to move the conversation out of a long reply-all email string. What are you hearing from your sources about this, and were there other methods of communication that could have been used?
Yeah, we don't know a lot about, what exactly went on. We just know what was said in the emails. And it does seem like if the intent was to move it out of a long reply all and maybe consolidate it, that's what would have been said, not remember my emails can be subject to open records. To me, it seemed pretty clear that that was what the thought process was there. But we do know, people have been trying to avoid open records laws for as long as they've existed. And the easiest way to do that is just to pick up the phone and do it. And I think what was really unique about the situation here was that it was in writing in an email, which is subject to public record laws. Someone actively saying, hey, don't forget, this can become public, let's move it here. So we know this is happening in all areas, but the fact that someone would write that down and say it made this situation pretty unique and interesting.
Yeah, for sure. We should note that we did reach out to the Big Ten for a statement, but we have yet to hear back. Emily, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.